Welcome to the Books Between Friends podcast.
3 lifelong friends.
One shared obsession.
Books.
From epic fantasy to page-turning thrillers.
We dive into the stories we love.
And the ones we just can't stop talking about.
So take a seat.
Grab a drink.
And get cozy. Welcome back, book friends. Speaking of cozy, what's making you guys feel cozy these days? So for me, I've actually been off this week, which has been amazing. Like literally, I have needed these days off since like forever. So if y'all don't know the world of education, we always get our summers off where we get like at least 2 months off. And then if you get into an administrator's role, you get maybe like 3 to 6 weeks off, depending on what role you're in. But now that I'm working an office role in education, I only get 1 week off. So this has been a really hard summer for me, but this week I'm off. It's been amazing. I have done so many things in my time that I really needed to get done. So it's been such a cozy week.
Say that I feel you. I remember my first summer where I was no longer in education. I was like, well, this just sucks, doesn't it? What's been keeping me cozy is I've started investing more time in a Bookstagram. And so yay. I started posting. I said I was going to start posting like 2 weeks ago, but that didn't happen. And so now I started, as we're recording this episode, last night.
You did.
I did.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I posted about, Tower of Dawn and Empire Storms, the tandem read.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also posted about Roe and Whitethorn, and I did his name in calligraphy.
Which love. I did see that. It looked really amazing.
Thank you. I'm still practicing, so.
That's so cool. Fun.
Steph, what's keeping you cozy?
Okay, so you guys know that we love to watch, trashy reality TV shows.
Yeah. Love it. Here for it. Yes.
Drama-filled, right? So we are watching The Ultimatum, Queer Love, Season 2 this week. And I have just been enjoying this season so much. If you're not watching it, you have to watch it. It's really good.
It's really good. Yeah. I started it last night.
Good.
I
think I might have influenced you into doing that.
You sure did.
How far did you get?
I want to say I'm on the 4th episode. Maybe.
Okay, cool. It really ramps up, I would say, 2 more episods in.
It's already really good. It's already so good. Yeah. I was just like, what? It was so late last night. I didn't realize how late it was until I was like, shoot. I was like, you know what? I should probably go to bed. I have an early morning.
Love it.
That's how you know something's good, though.
Yeah, because I really didn't know what time it was. And, of course, I had wine with me, so, that doesn't help.
Yeah. That's the best way to consume this media, right? Glass of wine.
Yeah, but it was really good. Those
piece
couples are... Yeah, yeah. So this is season 2 of this show. And me and Stephanie were talking about this. Season 1 was really good. And we were talking about some of, our favorite couples. But now I'm kind of starting to see some of the messiness already starting. And I'm just they haven't even started being a couple yet, and it's already super messy. I love it. It's so good. It's so good.
Love it.
But you know what, guys? Speaking of romance, I mean, I don't know how well this ties into this, but now that we're kind of doing our first romance novel for our podcast, let's talk about some of our favorite tropes, because I feel like everybody picks the same favorite trope over and over, and I feel like some of these other tropes don't get touched on very much, but everyone's favorite seems to be enemies to lovers. Yes, it's a great one. Yes, I love it. I love that for Xaden and Violet, because obviously they're enemies to lovers. But what are some other really good ones that you guys have kind of touched on, throughout the years?
So I for sure know that this is a controversial one because most people don't like this, but I love a love triangle. I'm into it.
No.
The drama of it, just I love it. It's good.
But I guess that makes sense if you really love these reality shows, because a lot of what we're watching right now, the Ultimatum, has a lot of love triangles in it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I can see that.
Oh God! And then you wonder, that makes me wonder why you don't like Twilight. I mean, that's the perfect love triangle.
That's a terrible...
I can get into the Twilight dislike, but we don't have time for all the things I have to say about that.
You know what though? Honestly, I think that's my fault because I think I pushed it so hard on her that she just was over it at that point.
No, I gave it a fair shot. I read all the books. I watched all the movies. I am just
Movies
not
were
a Twilight
awful though.
girly. Sorry,
The
y'all.
movies were awful.
I
The books were too.
yes, okay, yeah. But I will say, like, I do enjoy watching people's reactions on TikTok of the Breaking Dawn Part Two
Oh yeah, that's really
at
good.
the
Yeah.
fight scene. I on the flip side of the enemies to lovers, I do love a good friends to lovers, and I know that is also not very popular.
Yeah.
But I like it done in like a specific kind of way. I don't know. It's just, it's weird. But friends to lovers also often coincides with, it's not really a trope, it's more of a theme, but found family. And I love the found family. Like it's so heartwarming and cozy.
Yeah.
And so, yes, like those things usually go hand in hand for me. And so friends to lovers is usually one of my favorite tropes.
Cool.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm not, I maybe I just haven't read enough. Like again, I keep calling myself a reader, but like there's so many books I haven't touched on where I don't know that I've read a lot of friends to lovers books or with that trope in it. So I don't know that I'm a fan or not a fan. So we'll see. For me,
Read Wolf's Song.
okay, I do need to
Yeah.
read that though. You
I
have
was
told
going
me
to
that
say
so
you're
many
currently
times.
reading one with a couple friends to lovers, which is Harry Potter.
Oh, right. That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. See,
Yes.
I'm telling you, like,
Classic.
I haven't read these things before, though, so I'm reading them out. So for me, I love a good slow burn, y'all. Like, that's like one of my favorite. I love the tension between the characters. I love that yearning. I love like when the guy is just like pining after the girl. To me, that's probably one of my favorite tropes to read about when it comes to romances, especially in a lot of our books that we read.
Yeah.
I love me a good slow burn, but not too much of a slow burn. Like, do not make me wait books for y'all to like finally kiss or something. Like, you can't do that to me because by then I'm pissed that you haven't even like touched each
So
other.
for you, it has to happen in book one.
Yes, but not immediately. If you keep me like on the edge of my seat throughout most of the book, I'm fine as long as we're getting there towards the end. Sure. Okay, book friends, you guys voted for this book, and we are so excited to jump into a new discussion. And I'm especially excited to be the lore master for this month's book discussion as the romance girly of the group. I cannot wait to giggle through a lot of this book because I will. And I cannot wait to get into some of these swoon-worthy moments with y'all. But before we jump into this discussion, I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie for a quick spoiler warning.
Okay, book friends. So, real quick before we jump in, spoiler warning. If you are listening to this episode, we are assuming that you've read through chapter 7 of Beach Read by Emily Henry. So, let's go ahead and dive in.
So let's get our first impressions. What did you guys think of the first 7 chapters of the book?
All right. So yes, you are the romance girly of the group, but I've been known to dabble in romance. Like I said, I do like the escapism that it provides.
Mm-hmm.
It's heartwarming. I love all of that. I think the love for me really started around the pandemic when, everything was just sucky and I needed something. And that's when I found Red, White, and Royal Blue. Fell in love with it just because it provided such a good escapism. Young romantasy, obviously, we read Fourth Wing and that series, and young adult fantasy often involves some type of romantic subplot. So going into this book, I was trying to approach it through that lens. Having said that, I think what also helped me really get into this book was the fact that we just finished The Nightingale. And
Okay.
while The Nightingale was great, I gave it 5 stars. I definitely needed a change of pace.
Oh, yeah.
And a change of tone for sure. And I think even as we're starting this episode, we're smiling a lot more already. And I think that's very indicative that we were all ready for a change.
Yep.
So I'm very excited about this discussion today.
So, I too am not a romance fan typically, but I'm going into this book knowing that Emily Henry is kind of known to be the summer romance queen. So, I am excited to get into this right away. I'm finding myself relating to January, and especially with her sentiments that she talks about later on in the section about women authors and how their writing doesn't get taken as seriously as men's do. And so I'm loving the characters, especially her best friend so far. Like I'm finding myself smiling, reading through their conversations on the phone and their text conversations. Like it's actually reminding me a lot of how we communicate, you know?
Yep.
And it's just fun for me to be able to relate to characters that I'm reading. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, so for me, before I actually got into fantasy, romance was the first genre that I really got into. I even got like really obsessed with like a historical fiction because of the romance. I think back in college, Stephanie got me into The Tudors. And one of the things that really intrigued me about that story was the freaking romance behind King Henry VIII and his six wives, y'all. And so I don't know what it is about a good romance. I mean, that wasn't a good romance. He was terrible, but
Yeah. Well, so to be clear, we got really into the show
right.
called The Tudors.
Yes, the
I think
show.
it was on
Yes.
HBO.
Yeah.
It was
But
very
then,
steamy.
yes, very
Yeah.
steamy. But then the show got me into a bunch of books written by Philippa
Yeah.
Gregory that centered
Right.
around that story. So I don't know what it is about it. I love a good romance story. I love when two characters just really mesh together, and I love seeing their banter, their love develop. I just love seeing all
Mhm.
those really cheesy moments. But I will say I can't do too cheesy, too cliche. So I do have a limit to what amount of romance I can take. I know, I know, I know.
That's news to me.
But as
Right.
Ethan and Stephanie both know, I latch on to the romance of any novel we read to. So that's just
Yeah.
me. But with the beach read, you don't get too much from the first 7 chapters. So my first impression, there's not too much to go off of. But I really do like the two characters that we're introduced to, Gus and January. I've heard a lot of really great things about Emily Henry. So I'm really excited to read one of her novels. And I'm hoping this kind of leads me more into other novels of hers. Because she just has so many good ones, and I'm kind of overwhelmed with the amount of like books that she's written. So I really want to make sure if I like one, then I'm sure I'll like some of the others. I like that it's not super cliche or super cheesy. I'm happy to say that I'm really liking this one so far. So I love their witty banter so far, which always makes for a good book. So I cannot wait to read more into this. And I just love how neither miss a beat when it comes to firing off a combat to each of their sarcastic comments. So, like, I can't wait to get more into that. But, like, it's just been a really good read so far. And, like Ethan said, after reading The Nightingale, I think we would take anything right now just from such a heavy book.
Yeah.
So, the fact that we're focusing on two characters and their romance, I'm loving that already. I already feel so much better. And I don't feel like I have to go to my sister's house and go cry again. So.
Needless to say, we're all super excited about this change in tone.
Yeah.
I feel like we're dissing on the Nightingale, but I was like, we really
No,
enjoy
no,
the
no.
Nightingale.
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
I think with just everything that's going on in the world right now, plus reading the Nightingale,
Yeah.
it was a 1-2 punch. And so
Yeah.
I
It
think
was just a little heavy.
yeah, I
Yes.
think we're ready for this very much so.
Absolutely nothing against Kristen Hanna. She has beautiful writing, so I hope that
Yeah.
nobody takes this the wrong way. But now that we've talked about our first impressions, let's get into our deep dive part of our conversation. But for all you romance lovers out there, please be sure to stick around for after our deep dive, where we are going to share what we love about romances. We kind of talked in it a little bit, but we're going to go into more detail. So be sure to stick around. So in the beginning of the book, we're introduced to January Andrews. She is our main character. She's the romance novelist in this story. She's believed to be the hopeless romantic. She believes in happily ever afters because she has this perfect life and perfect parents, and how that kind of like led into her writing a lot about romance novels. And so she talks about when she was 12, her parents sat her down and talked about how her mom was diagnosed with cancer. And so she was really worried for her mom, but her dad really took on this role of being the rock of the family and just making sure that neither her mom or her worried about it. Just very much like, everything's going to be all right. We're all happy. We're all great. This is a great family. Showing this like picturesque life of what two parents should be like, right? In love. And so January takes all of this and she becomes a romance writer. She like falls in love with this like perfect guy who, he's like an ER doctor, and she just has the most amazing life. And so like in the beginning, that's all we get, right? Like we get this like perfect life. And then it jumps into like 28 perfect to 29 not so perfect, where now she's broke. She's almost homeless. She's single. She doesn't know what to do. And so I'm just like, man, what a jump. So when I didn't really expect that to take such a drastic turn so fast.
Well, as she's like thinking about how things have changed so drastically in her life in such a short amount of time, honestly, she's thinking about how her idealistic family life influenced the type of writing that she always did, and the books that she wrote, and how now she's struggling ever since all of that fell apart and kind of
Yeah.
this facade of a perfect life just shattered and reality set in, and she's still processing,
Yeah.
on top of a breakup and losing the place where she was living. Like that's harsh,
Yeah.
that's a lot to go through in within a year. So I feel for her. And I'm hoping that we're gonna get to see her like come through this moment in time and, hopefully write something good.
Yeah. I will say what instantly caught me off guard, and I kind of liked it, was that January, I'm just going to call her Jan. Jan has already had a growth arc, right? Like she's already had this moment where her mother was diagnosed with cancer, and that made her realize that, like, life is too precious, and we can't take it for granted. And that's what prompted their family to do all these like really meaningful and impactful things when she was younger. And so she's already had that growth moment. Like that's something that you would see as like the climax in a book normally. That's already happened for
Yeah.
her. And so she's having to go through this all over again. And so I kind of liked that. It kind of turns the normal plot line on its head. I mean, you can still, obviously we're dealing with romance here, so you can still see where it's going to go eventually.
Right.
But yeah, that's what I liked about this chapter, is that any normal convention of what we thought of a plot line has been completely kind of changed.
I love that. And another thing that I was thinking about too, like I know a lot of us really try to keep our personal lives out of our work lives, but a lot of the times it just bleeds in, especially when you have a lot of heavy stuff going on in your personal life, like January has here,
Totally.
where you literally go from thinking you have this perfect life and then everything falling apart in 1 year. So we kind of get more into that as the story progresses, like what happens in her life that kind of makes her go from like super happy to like being 29 and broke and single and almost homeless. So we kind of get into the point where January has a flashback of what she's thinking about happen in her life. I don't want to say what went wrong in her life, but kind of where that turning point went. Kind of like what to your point, Ethan, like it's already happening now in the first two chapters where like we're getting the turning point in somebody's life. But January is thinking back to her dad. So like I mentioned before, she thought of her dad as like the rock of the family, where after the mom had the diagnosis, like he just kind of kept everyone centered, kind of kept everyone making sure like they knew that he was there for them, that he loved them, he loved the mom, he loved the daughter. But then all of a sudden he dies. And so it's crazy to think that, because the mom is the one diagnosed with cancer, and yet you had the dad who dies. Like, that, I mean, that's a lot to just think about. You were preparing yourself for one of your parents to pass away from something, and yet your other parent unexpectedly goes away, right? But not only does she lose her dad, but she gets a huge secret revealed at this funeral. She starts thinking about, she believed in happily ever after until the day of her father's funeral, where it says her family had been through so much already, and somehow they always came through it stronger with more love and laughter than before. And then one day her dad was just gone. At her dad's funeral, a woman that January didn't recognize approached her and told her that she's heard so much about her. Can you imagine having somebody come up to you and say like, hey, I've known your father my whole life, and being known as the other woman? And then also realizing that your mom knew about their entire marriage, as their only daughter, as a person who believed in true love and happily ever afters. You get this huge revelation at her dad's funeral, somebody that you can't even yell at anymore because it's like, I can't get any answers from you. And then she gives you this letter and says, here, your dad left you this lake house, by the way. It's yours now. And obviously January hasn't opened this letter, right? So
Yeah, this is crazy. And like this lady Sonia didn't even say to her outright, like, "Hey, I was
Right.
your dad's side piece," But what happened? Like, she kind of almost intuitively knew in her gut as this woman was coming up to her who she was and what she was to her dad. And then while Sonia's telling her about how she knew her dad her whole life, blah, 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 then her mom comes up and knows her name and angrily says, Sonia, and like asks her to leave.
Yeah.
So that's how January finds out that her mom knew about her and kept the secret from her. So I think this is like two levels of betrayal for January.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
one from her dad for hiding it from her, and two from her mom for knowing and hiding it from her. And like as far as the letter goes, I'm sure she's just scared to like she's not ready to face whatever it is
Right.
her dad wrote for
Yeah.
her. She's barely processing the loss of her dad and now the loss of what she thought was her parents' perfect marriage.
Yeah.
And so, like, whatever's in that letter is just going to really set that reality in. And so that's scary to have to face. I don't think she's ready for that right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree because like how scary would it be to have the rug pulled out from you like that, you know? Someone you thought you knew and you thought was perfect was actually just another human in disguise. You know, like I agree with you, Steph. She doesn't want this image of her father tarnished any more than it already is, right?
Right.
And then she's angry in general, right? Because I mean, she's having to grieve a lot here. She's grieving the loss of her father. She's grieving the loss of the image of her father.
Right.
She's grieving the addition of Sonia.
Hmm.
She's grieving the trust that she had with her mother. She's grieving the inspiration that came with her writing of
Right.
like, I mean, that's where her inspiration came from was
Yeah.
just this idyllic life. And now it's not there anymore.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say. Like, I feel like a lot of kids, this is she's an only child too. So like, I feel like that's even harder because I feel like other kids, when they have siblings, like they can lean on their siblings, they can kind of talk
Yeah.
to them and like, hey,
Totally.
what's going
That's a good
on?
point.
And like, just have that conversation between, but she has nobody to talk to. I'm sure her mother's not going to tell her what's going on. She can't yell at her dad now because he's gone. She's definitely not going to go to Sonia and be like, hey, what happened between y'all? Right. And so
No.
imagine like I feel like any family, whether you have a perfect love between the parents, like any family would be devastated to know that there has been like this like affair, other family happening,
Hmm.
right? But she had this perfect image in her head and it's just too much to go through. Like I don't know that I could even fathom thinking about that for anyone, whether or not I thought that you had the perfect love. So it's just crazy.
Yeah.
So the story takes us next to the lake house that Sonia said that her dad left January. And so January is here. Like I mentioned earlier, she's semi-homeless, so she's trying to find a place to go to. And so this lake house is in Michigan.
I was just
I
like,
just keep laughing when you keep calling her semi-homeless, but like,
But that's what she
y'all,
called
her
herself. She
dad
said
left her a whole free
semi-homeless.
house. I know. It's just fun. It's like a little privileged girl. Like, I'm homeless. Now I have to go live for free in my dad's lake house.
I know, like a first
know?
world problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
A
Good for
lake
you.
house. My word.
Actually,
Yeah.
very good point. Very good point. When she gets to the lake house, of course, she's struggling with knowing that this lake house is a lake house that her dad shared with this woman, right? And we find out that January is struggling with writer's block. She's hoping to get some inspiration this summer at the lake house. And we also come to find out that she's on a deadline to get a book written by the end of summer. So here we are at the lake house, struggling to write another romance after having to say goodbye to her father, after finding out that her father had another woman. So she's exploring the house. She ends up falling asleep and gets woken up by a raging party. And so she goes to investigate what's going on, and it happens to be her neighbor having a party. And she goes to the front door to try to ask them to turn the music down, but nobody's listening to her because, again, it's a rager, right? And so she gives up, she goes to the deck, and she notices her neighbor standing there. And so she sees this neighbor on the deck where he's not part of this party. And so she's really upset, and she asks him to turn the music down. And so he responds with, look, no one will be more thrilled than me when this night ends and everyone gets out of my house. But it is a Saturday night in summer on a street full of vacation homes, unless this neighborhood got airlifted to the little town from Footloose, which I thought was hilarious. It doesn't seem crazy to play music this late. And then he tells her, and maybe, just maybe, the brand new neighbor who stood on her deck screaming foot job so loud birds scattered could afford to be lenient if one miserable party goes later than she liked, which I thought was hilarious because it's like, here we go, here, let's start the banter, let's start the funny banter, right? And so that made January realize, like, maybe her neighbor, who she calls the grump, is not the only grump here. Maybe she's also being kind of a grump.
So we skipped the like first intro that they had when she was first getting into the house.
Oh,
And
right.
she's on the phone with her bestie and they're talking about it be like possibly having a sex dungeon.
Oh,
Because it was her dad and his mistress's house.
yeah.
She's like, go investigate the sex dungeon. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where that hilarious comment about the foot jobs came from. Because Everett, or yeah, that's the neighbor's name. He overheard that, and that's why he brought it up in this interaction. But like as she's going over to his front door to ask them to turn the music down, she's thinking to herself, like, the old January would have gotten excited about a party next door and would have joined the party.
Right.
And so now, instead of that, she's trying to like break up the party. So obviously she's struggling here. She's like going through a little bit of an identity crisis and also being a little grumpy. But I'm getting the sense that her neighbor is also possibly in the same boat here because he was out back, like being a broody boy. He wasn't in the party. And then he was like kind of snarky with his response to her about it.
Also love the fact that doesn't she refer to herself as like a Karen? Like she calls herself, she's like, oh man, like because he says like you're being a grump like for complaining about a party when it's in the summer and we're
On a
it's a
Saturday,
lake house.
Yeah.
Like it's perfectly reasonable for this to be happening even though I'm not in the party as well. But and she's like, oh man,
Right.
I am being a Karen. Like
I don't know if she calls herself a Karen, but she definitely calls herself a grump.
I thought I read Karen
I
in
think
there
she
somewhere.
did. She did mention Karen at some point. I
Yeah.
think.
But I appreciated the fact that she was able to like take a moment and step back and be like, oh, okay, like
Yeah.
maybe I shouldn't embrace this new January,
Right.
Oh, Jan. But I agree. I think they're in the same boat, and I'm like, dude, this is your part. Like, it's happening at your house. Like,
Right.
why are
Yeah.
you?
That was kind of
like-
weird.
Yeah, it was weird.
Well, and the
Also,
other
he
thing,
was
too-
like in the dark. There was
Right.
a light
That's
on
right.
in
Yeah.
the porch,
right.
but he was like outside of where it would have illuminated him. So she kind of like was surprised by him and actually screamed.
Right, yeah.
So
So,
that
are
was
we
funny,
even
too.
surprised like that she's in a writer's block right now? Because I feel like, I was reading the book and, it was going from the fact that she has this like picture perfect life to obviously all these new devastations happening. And now all of a sudden she's in a writer's block. We totally saw
Obviously.
that coming, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable.
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, so after their interaction, January wakes up hungover and she goes and leaves the lake house and she goes to a place called Pete's Cafe, which happens to be a cafe attached to a bookstore. So she buys some coffee, she gets there, she kind of wanders the bookstore and she starts thinking about what her agent might think, where, oh, maybe I should go introduce myself to the bookstore owner. And so she does, and it's a lady called Pete, so hence Pete's Cafe. So she introduces herself as an author, and the bookstore owner checks to see if they have any of her books, and they don't. So she immediately buys them and puts them in, tells her that she's going to have them in stock. And then she invites her to their book club meeting. She's like, it happens every Monday. You should definitely come. And she's like, yeah, that'd be great. And so as she was saying yes to Pete, somebody else walks in. And like Stephanie mentioned earlier, at the party, they were saying Everett over and over. And so that just happens to be the guy that her neighbor, the grump, that's his last name. And so the person that walks into the bookstore happens to be a person named Augustus Everett, or Gus. And that person is somebody that January knew back in college who also happened to be her old college writing rival who's also an author. And so they're actually very opposite in what they write. You know, she writes romance, he writes literary fiction. And so we get to see a little backstory of why January hates Gus so much. And so she remembers Gus from college and she thinks back of why they're rivals, right? And so she remembers one day where she was handing in one of her writing stories and everybody in the class had to give a critique for it. And as soon as Gus picks up hers, he says, "Let me guess, everyone lives happily ever after again." And so January just really took that and made her really upset. And so she has a really bad opinion of him. And so she talks about how in the next several years they compete, they take turns winning awards, they take turns winning contests and prizes, but they don't really speak to each other. And she hints at a night that they had together, but doesn't really get into it just yet. And so after she's remembering her time with Gus in college, that takes him back to the present where Pete is calling over January because she went and hid after she saw Gus coming to the door. And so she tries to introduce them like, "Hey guys, you guys are two authors in this really small town." And, you know, Gus says, "Oh yeah, we've met." And he says, "She's my neighbor." And so January thinks that he doesn't remember her from college. And so then they kind of start getting this little banter back and forth. And so she describes Gus's writing as something really groundbreaking and important, totally new and fresh, like a story about a disillusioned white guy wandering the world, misunderstood and coldly horny. So obviously she was making fun of Gus's writing, right? And then Gus, like,
oh my God. I loved that line. It
that
was
was so funny. But then Gus like immediately fires back, right? Doesn't even take like a second and says, "Tell me, which do you find more fascinating to write? Love-struck pirates or love-struck werewolves?" And so they just go back and forth.
Yeah, I'm also loving their banter so far. Like they're both witty and they're quick to fire back at each other. So I love that. And it's giving me like, especially with like the introduction of Pete and she's kind of like a whimsical character. It's giving me like a fun rom-com movie vibe. And so I love it. It's good. It's great.
Yes. Okay. So like I've said before, I think I'm going to make this like a tradition when we do a new book of like who I picture to be playing the characters in my head.
Oh yeah.
So for my One Tree Hill people, I picture Jana Kramer as our lead here. I picture her as Jan.
Okay.
And I picture
Austin. That.
I actually picture Austin Nichols as Gus. And so
he's the guy who plays Julian?
Yeah. Sorry. And so like that, those are, I don't know why, those are immediately the two people that popped into my head.
I'm sitting here Googling so I can like get a mental picture.
And what I will say is first, when they were in college, they used to refer to him as Sexy Gus. And to me, like those two things just don't go together. Like Gus.
Sexy evil Gus.
Yes, sexy evil Gus. But like just Gus. It makes me think of like a grumpy grandpa. So I like, but I'm excited for this book to change my mind about it. The other
what's funny is like I used to know a Gus in college and he was just a goofy guy. So this character to me is the opposite.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I knew like an older Gus when I worked at the Y, so that's immediately what I pictured. But what I was picking up here is Anne of Green Gables vibes. I love Anne Shirley and Gilbert Blythe. Like they are probably one of my favorite couples of all time. Very enemies to lovers, even though that was just the perception Anne Shirley had of Gilbert at first, is he's my enemy, blah, blah, blah. And I feel like it's the same thing happening here. And so, that's what I immediately latched onto when they started having that quick, witty banter back and forth. And I was like, yep, that's Anne Shirley and Gilbert Blythe. Like, that's what this is.
I can totally see that. I'm also like curious because he didn't really, so she thought maybe he didn't remember her from college, but later on there's like moments when he's got like knowing looks or like this, I don't know. I'm just picking up that maybe he does remember her from college, but maybe he possibly doesn't think she remembers him from college. So we'll see if that gets revealed.
So she also made a comment like with this whole her thinking back on like him in college, right? Where she was like, that's when he became my rival, not that he knew though. So it's like maybe she immediately latched onto the fact like he's my rival, but am I his, right? And so maybe that's
like he probably never thought of them as rivals.
Exactly. But she did because of the one comment that he made about her happily ever afters, right?
Yeah.
And I
Hmm.
mean, honestly, not everybody is a fan of happily ever afters. Like some people don't like the
Yeah.
oh, they live happily ever after again.
Again.
So
Yeah.
I can see
Yeah.
that. I mean, that's one reason that, Steph, like you said, you don't want to get into romances because it gets too cliche, too cheesy,
Yeah. It's
right?
predictable and
Yeah.
cheesy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So I can
Well,
totally see
like
that.
there was also before this, as she's getting sick at home from her hangover.
Oh, right.
And actually, the first day that she moved into the house, she noticed that there was her dad had put up a list of that she made on the New York Times, but she noticed that he was above her on the list, that Everett was.
Yeah.
And then when she was throwing up in the bathroom from her hangover that morning, she noticed that his book was in her dad's magazine rack next to the toilet, next to her book. And so, again, even though they're past college, she was still keeping tabs on his career. So this rivalry has been going on in her head at least
For a
since
while
college.
now.
So she's already like she's carrying that already, and so she was immediately defensive when they had this interaction,
Yeah.
which was
Well,
funny.
I guess in her head, like she also thinks it was a rivalry because they did take turns winning so many prizes and awards
Right.
back and
Yeah.
forth. So it's like I have to be better than who they think the best is. So even if he didn't
Hmm.
care and he didn't think that, she's already caring about that and thinking that she feels like she needs to prove herself over and over. You
Yeah.
know?
True.
Yeah. I'm very interested to see this develop because
Yeah.
Gus never starts the argument, right?
Right.
Yes,
It's
that's
always
true. That's true.
like, "Oh, Jan." It's always her. She's the one because it shows her insecurity, honestly.
Right.
She perceives
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that he thinks that romance is beneath him just because of
Right.
that one comment that he made. Let me guess.
Years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It ends in happily ever after again, right?
Right.
But if you write romance, yes. I mean, that is literally the definition of a romance. It has to
Yeah.
have a happily ever
Right.
after or a happily for
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
like that, if that's your if that's your genre, girl, own it. Like
Yeah.
it sure does. But I'll tell
Right.
you what, romance is the hottest selling genre of all time. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, get off me. But yeah, I'm interested to see this because honestly, to what we've said before, I don't think he perceives any kind of rivalry between the two of them.
I don't
And
think so either.
Yeah.
and
Probably
when he
not.
does clap back, it's because she started it, and he probably just can't let it go because it's probably fun.
I was gonna say, I think he
Yeah.
enjoys like riling her up. It's kind of funny.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Because she
I
does
feel
dumb
that too.
things when she's riled up, like hiding behind the display
book?
in the bookstore.
Yeah.
She's like,
Yeah.
I loved that inner monologue that she had with herself. She was like, I'm going to do what any rational human would have done at that point. Hide.
Yeah. Yeah.
When he walks
and then
through the
she's
door.
even thinking to herself, like, can I like sneak out even though she knows there's a bell at the
Oh,
door?
that's right. Yeah.
Like, girl, no, you're stuck here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Small town. Hello.
Oh, and then for Pete, I also picture Allison Janney.
Who's that?
Allison Janney.
She played the
Googling
mom
again.
on The Help.
Okay, yeah.
She also
yeah.
plays the mom on Mom, the TV show.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, you're going to know exactly this character. It's 100%. If you watch the movie called The Way, Way Back, Allison Janney plays like this eccentric character on that show. That is exactly what I picture for Pete here. And
Honestly, don't know what you're talking about, but it's all good.
I am correct. You need to go watch The Way, Way Back in general because it's a fantastic movie. Anyway.
Okay. So January gets her little escape here, and she gets a phone call from her agent who's just calling her to remind her about her deadline that she has until September 1st to be able to write her next novel, and it has to get done like it's been promised, right? I think they're in June right now, so that tells her she has like a few months to do that. So January promises her that the book will be done by then, but then also tells her she hasn't even started it yet. So, this is where she starts thinking about those inner thoughts, right? Where she has to write a romance despite having recently lost close to all faith and love in humanity. She was definitely struggling for inspiration. So kind of what we already talked about, right? Like this is why she's in that writer's block. So back in the lake house, she definitely wants to write. She says, okay, I'm going to do 1,500 words, but only writes 400. And so she goes back to her head where she lives in right now. And she's thinking back to a time where words easily poured out of her back then. True love had seemed like the grand prize, the one thing that could weather any storm, save you from both drudgery and fear. And writing about it had felt like the single most meaningful gift she could give. And so finally, it's Monday. She goes to the book club that Pete has invited her to, and she's thinking that she's going to be the guest author. So she has all these bookmarks and a wine bottle in her bag, and she's ready to go. And so as soon as she gets there, the last person that she thinks will be there is there, and that is the other woman, Sonia. She just happens to be there, and I'm just like, what the heck? I don't know why I did not see that coming, y'all. Like, I mean, I knew that she was from that town, but I didn't think she would get like reintroduced into the story so quickly, right? And
Me
so
either. I didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
I honestly didn't see it coming either. But after I read it, I was like, why didn't I see that coming? She obviously lives here, like you were saying. I was like, yeah, I mean,
it's a small town. We know this. Yeah.
Right. And so obviously there's going to be some more coming up with the fact that like she knows Pete and like Pete's like inviting her into her home and stuff like that. So there's going to be some kind of run in there, like a lot of foreshadowing happening that they're going to have an eventual sit down, right? Hopefully. And so, of course, January does what she did in the bookstore and she runs away. Like she runs to the bathroom. She avoids her, but then thankfully she hears Sonia leaving. And so she's like, okay, good. I'm safe for now, right? So she gets back out and then another guest shows up and this time it's Gus. And so she's immediately annoyed because Pete introduces Gus as the one and only Augustus Everett and she only gets introduced as January. And so to her in her mind, like she's already comparing herself with Gus as just with that introduction, right? Kind of going back to what you said, Ethan, right? Like kind of like her insecurities kind of showing up there. And so they sit down. Pete begins the book club, which is, by the way, like such a weird name. The book club is called Red, White Russians and Blue Book Club. Like talk about a mouthful.
I thought it was so funny.
It's such an awesomely terrible name. Like it is. Yes, you have to like love it because it's so terrible. Like that's a terrible
catchy.
book club
Or it's
name.
not catchy, and that's what's great about it.
Yeah.
It was just such a mouthful for me to read. I was like,
also, White Russians, gross.
I know. I cannot.
So, do y'all know what that drink is?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's vodka and milk.
Yeah.
Oh, gross.
Yeah, disgusting.
Oh, I didn't know that. I should have Googled that when I saw that.
I don't like any kind of cream in my alcohol. Like, I cannot do it.
No.
Like a pina colada.
What? I don't think... Well, like an espresso martini is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more like foamy, though. Yeah. Like, I can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, or I say that, but like an Irish cream, I can do that too. That's good.
See, okay, there you go.
No, we're into cream and alcohol, just not White Russians.
Just not yet.
So it turns out that Pete did not invite January as the guest author. She just invited her as a book club member because they start talking about spy novels, which is hilarious because even Gus has a confused look because he probably thought the same thing where he thought he was going to be the guest author, right? So
the way she introduced him too, I would have thought so.
Exactly. Well, I thought that's what she was doing with.
Yeah, Pete led them to believe that that's why she was inviting them. I feel like
I was just going to say.
Yeah, it's kind of like matchmaker here.
You think so?
I didn't think about it that way.
I didn't think about it that way either.
Yeah, I totally think so.
Because, like, I thought, like, Pete was like, oh, here's an author. You know, I don't have her book, so let's talk about one at the book club.
I guess I just read it that way, because two authors, what are the chances, and
right.
Like it seemed very like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge to me. But I could have completely made that up.
That makes sense, but no, I can see that. I didn't pick it up while I was reading it, but it makes sense to me.
It does make sense. Now that you say it, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
It's kind of like forced proximity, right?
Yeah, literally forced proximity since they're neighbors, but yeah.
Yeah. So after they talk about spinals, which I'm sure Gus and January had no idea what they were talking about because they probably didn't even read the book, right? January starts saying her goodbyes to Pete and she realizes she's had too much to drink and doesn't want to drive home. So she tells Pete that she's going to take Uber, but Pete tells her, hey, there's only one Uber in town. Like, they're probably not going to be out right now. She's like, no, I'm going to take an Uber, and realizes there's no Uber in town ready to take her home. And so Gus offers to take her, obviously, because they live right next to each other, and she refuses until she finally gives in. And she says, but I don't want to go home yet and fall asleep tipsy. So then Gus says, okay, perfect. I have a plan for us to sober up, right? And then he takes her to a donut shop. So they get to the donut shop, and
Which sounds disgusting, by the way.
it does sound disgusting, yeah. Well, the coffee in the town sounds
Yeah.
disgusting altogether.
Yeah. How
Heck?
disappointing.
Right?
Like usually you can find a good cup of coffee in a small town.
Especially when
Yeah,
it's
but-
a book concerned with writers. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like the
Yeah.
writing and good coffee goes hand in hand.
The fuel of writing, right?
Like, literally, this guy wouldn't even sell them the coffee because of how terrible it is. Like, how gross.
Yeah. He was like free because it's been sitting out for
It's been on the
however long.
burner for like 5 hours. Have a cup.
Also, this guy's in his underwear.
Yes, he's in his underwear.
Shop. I'm not consuming anything from this place if he's cooking in his underwear.
Want some donuts? Don't buy the coffee. Yeah.
No,
Sorry.
thank you.
Like, what is going on in Michigan, y'all? Like, I don't know that I want to go visit.
Literally. It's not on my itinerary anytime soon.
Wait, what's the name of this town? I desperately do not want to go. Thank you.
Yeah.
But it is called North Bear Shore, I believe. A random name.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so they get a half dozen donuts, and Gus makes a comment about the donuts looking disgusting, and then January says, finally, something we agree on. And Gus says, I bet we agree on a lot. Which goes back to what we were thinking. You know, January is just building
Yeah.
up this, like, rivalry in her head with, like, Gus. Like, come on, give him a chance, right? And so they attempt to make real conversation, but neither are willing to answer each other's questions. So January asks him if she can ask him a question, and he responds with, why did you move here? And so she doesn't want to answer. So instead, January tells Gus he was being rude to her the day that they met over the raging party, and he apologizes to her, telling her he was having a bad day. Then he asks her to forgive him, that he's been told he makes a bad first impression, which is when January finally tells him that that wasn't their first impression, which he says nothing to, by the way. So she tells him, I've met you before, but doesn't say anything, right? So he finally says, if I answer your question, will you forgive me? And January finally agrees to this and asks him her question. She says, you thought they were doing your book, didn't you? And so going back to the book club, thinking about the guest author, right? And so Gus tells her that he has been living there for 5 years and Pete has never been invited to the book club. So now it makes me think that what you said was true.
Yeah, this is what really cemented it
Yeah.
for me. Like, she's never asked me before, but all of a sudden, you know.
So after 5 years,
Yeah, that
like,
makes sense.
That makes total sense. Like, I didn't even think about that either. So yeah, so what did you guys think about the interaction at the donut shop?
Yeah, this is where I'm thinking like obviously, or to me anyway, obviously he does remember her from college because when she mentioned that wasn't my first impression of you, he kind of had this knowing look in his eye, but then he just kind of skirted over that and continued like, okay,
Right.
will you forgive me? And the whole question thing. So and I can sense that they have like I mentioned before, I think they're in the same boat. You know, maybe he's also struggling with his writing right now. Like for whatever reason, he didn't seem to be enjoying his party from the other night. And
Right.
she's also in a dark place right now or coming out of one. And so, you know, that can obviously be a recipe for bringing people together.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see where that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also tend to agree with that. I do think that Gus remembers her.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because there's a moment where Jan, she recollects a memory.
You're making me see her like Jan from
The Office.
Jan
From the Brady Bunch.
the Brady Bunch. Yeah.
I
Sure,
was thinking of The
Jan.
Office.
And also, the way she's behaving right now is very Jan from the Brady Bunch. Would that make Gus Marsha? She's like, Marsha.
Yeah, I could see it. But she has that recollection of a memory that her best friend, you know, told her that he asked about her one time. Like, what's her deal?
Yeah.
And when she wasn't in the room, obviously, because she didn't know that this conversation had happened. And so I was like, why would you even ask if she wasn't on your radar somewhere? So
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely
If there's
think
not a level of interest there.
yeah, I definitely think he remembers her.
Right.
But yeah, love this proof of their witty banter prowess that they have here.
Yeah.
I love their dialogue. It's so easy for dialogue like that to be really cringy in a book,
Yes.
but it's
Yeah.
so believable here. Like I can picture them in this coffee donut shop having this conversation, just jabbing each other with their words. I can totally see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, like neither are willing to be vulnerable here, right? Because like they don't want to answer any real questions. She obviously
Right.
brought it back to the book club because it's like we just went to that. So let's talk about something easy and not so deep, right? Because of
Right.
course she's not going to explain to him why she's there just yet. Because then that would have to mean that she'd have to be vulnerable and tell him my dad just died.
Right.
Oh, it's the lake house. Oh, this. Oh, that. You know.
Yeah. Like he didn't know, but that was a loaded question. Why did you move here?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
too much to unpack there right
Exactly.
Question.
now. Yeah.
So they banter back and forth for a bit while they're eating the donuts. And honestly, like if they thought it was that disgusting, though, why are they eating these donuts? Like
Because
some
they
of
need
the
to
donuts that
sober
they
up.
described.
She's drunk and trying to get sober.
I know, but I'm
Yeah.
like some of these donuts that they described. I'm like, oh,
I was like, they're not even donuts. They're like clumps of donut. Like,
yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it sounds like the guy shoved all these donuts into a box that was too small.
yeah.
So now it's just like a clump of
Of
donut
dough.
dough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds gross.
So while they were going back and forth, January makes a comment about his books. And so he finally asked her, "What do you have against my books? Like that you have allegedly not read?" And then she immediately fires back with, "What do you have against my books, which you have certainly not read?" And then that's when he asked what makes her so sure that he hasn't read her books. And she mentions the pirate comment because that's not the kind of writing that she does. She was like, "That's not the romance I write. In fact, my books aren't even shelved as romance technically. They're shelved as women's fiction." Then he said, "I don't understand why there need to be a full genre that's just books for women." And this comment really upset January. And so she angrily fired off, "I know how to tell a story, Gus, and I know how to string a sentence together. If you swapped out all my Jessicas for Johns, do you know what you'd get? Fiction. Just fiction. Ready and willing to be read by anyone, but somehow by being a woman who writes about women, I've eliminated half of Earth's population from my potential readers. And you know what? I don't feel ashamed of that. I feel pissed that people like you will assume my books couldn't possibly be worth your time, while meanwhile you could shart on live TV and the New York Times would praise your bold display of humanity." And then that's where our section ends because she's like, "You know what? I am sober. Take me home."
Which
What
again,
did you guys think?
we don't plan these out, but that was like a perfect cliffhanger for this section. I was like,
That was a
Yeah.
perfect
You're like,
ending.
shoot,
Yeah.
now what?
she mad.
So,
she mad, man.
man, she was
Yeah.
pissed, y'all. But honestly, she had a really great point. Like,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I feel like there's just so many freaking double standards these days, and I'm just like, and I'm over it. Like, what did you guys think?
Right. Yeah, no, totally. I'm 1000% with January on this sentiment. Like, just the sheer fact that it's a woman writing about women, and all of a sudden that's a subcategory of a genre and not just fiction, literary fiction like his. The default being men's perspective is tired. Like, that's hack. Like, I'm also over it. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that she clapped back so forcefully. Like, he needed that. Obviously, I don't think he even meant it, but that's the kind of default thinking that causes these types of divides.
Right.
And it's not okay. And it does need to be called out.
Yeah, totally. It's like how do you disrupt systemic, like, just issues like that, right? Sometimes the only way is to get right up in their face and be angry about it, and that's what she did here. Although I don't think that was planned on her part to act like that. It was
Right.
just a knee-jerk reaction, and rightfully so. But to your point, I also don't think he meant it as a mean-spirited comment. To him, it was just some offhand remark, like, I don't really understand that, which proves the systemic issue, right? Like, if it didn't even compute for him,
Right.
that it was
Yeah.
an issue. So again, to Gus, it was just an offhand remark, but it's really important to her, and now that's visible. And I think he will. We obviously don't know because it's the next section, but I think that will probably be the spark of a good amount of respect for her. Think like, wow, this is really important to her. This also makes me think that she's not going to be writing romance. Like, I think we're going to, like, that's an area that we're going to go into. So we'll see.
Well, I was just going to say, like, obviously here, like something's happening here, whether it's not even them falling in love with each other, right? Like I know that this is a romance novel, so like there has going to be some kind of love here.
Hmm.
But like just between these two characters, what we're seeing, do y'all think it's the beginning of two authors mutually respecting each other? Or do y'all see this like becoming a bigger like rivalry thing that she's like built up in her head?
Yeah, and you know what, Ethan, while you were just talking just now, it made me think that maybe we possibly misinterpreted Gus's comment. Like maybe he didn't think, oh, I don't understand why there has to be a separate women's literature. To me, it should all be considered at the same level. But it could easily be misconstrued the way January did. And like I took it that way. But then I started thinking maybe he doesn't feel that way. We're just making assumptions the way we think he's been making assumptions about her this whole time.
Totally.
So to your question, Jen, about like, do you think it's the beginning of like a mutual level of respect? I feel like I hope so. Hopefully that's the case here, and he'll hear her out on her perspective with women's literature, and like maybe they'll each help each other grow in their art form. Maybe his perspective will influence her writing in whatever she ends up writing this summer, and vice versa, because I get the sense that he's also struggling with his writing at this point.
She's built up this rivalry in her head. We mentioned
Yes.
several times.
Yes. Yeah.
So she already is on the defensive with whatever he says. So I think that you're
Right.
right, Steph. Maybe she immediately thought of it as a negative as to what he was saying because she just wants a
Hmm.
reason to fight with him, I think. You
Yes.
know?
Well,
Possibly.
she
Yeah.
already has this perception of who he is in her head, which colors
Right.
everything that he
Right.
says. So totally, which
Right.
when I say it like that way, like Steph, to your point, what you said, that probably is what he was thinking, right? Like,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Maybe.
that's interesting. But I think their respect will come through their rivalry. Like they're going to be rivals, but that's how they respect each other. When
Right.
there's that healthy
Mm.
level of competition. Right now it's unhealthy. It's an unhealthy
Right.
level of competition because it's
Yeah.
perceived more on one side than the other. But
Right.
I think that there will become that mutual respect through that competition they have with each other.
I
Yeah.
agree. And sometimes we need that push. Like we need to have
Yeah.
some of
Yeah.
those strong emotions that pushes us too. Like
Hmm.
like right now she's just focusing on this grief part. Like she needs something else to really push her past that?
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
All right, friends. So that's the end of our deep dive of Beach Read. Now we're going to move on to a segment we're calling Swoon and Tell, where we discuss some of our favorite quotes and moments that made us swoon. But for today's episode, because we're just starting to get to know our characters, there's not a lot of swoon and tell moments just yet. But what we're going to do is we're going to share what we like or what we don't like about romances. So I'll start us off here. So I kind of had a hard time trying to figure out, like, just pinpointing like what it is that I really love about romances because I love reading them. And I will say, as of lately, one of my favorite authors is Anna Huang, and she writes a lot of spicy romance. So like, I try not to think about the spice too much. I try to think about just like what makes a good romance good for me, right? And so I will say one of the things that like I love reading about is like two characters that have really great chemistry. And you might think that that's in every romance, but it's actually not. And so whenever I am reading a good romance, like it has to be really great chemistry. I love when there's like really great flirtatious banter. I just love seeing the characters going back and forth, right? Not just focusing on like, oh, I love you. This is why I love you. I will say one of the things that I like is when the guy falls first, which may be a lot of romances, because I think like obviously women writing romance, they're going to want the guy to fall first. But I do love that. I also like it when the FMC is not too stubborn about admitting their feelings. Because I feel like I've read some romances where the girl just does not want to let go of her independence and does not want to let go of her identity, which I feel like you shouldn't be able to give your identity when you fall in love. Like that shouldn't be a thing, right? But they just get too stubborn and they just don't want to give in to the feelings that they have for the guy. And then sometimes that goes on for too long. And I'm like, all right, I'm over it. I get it, girl. You're independent. Like, move on. Just admit it, right? And I've already mentioned it before, but like my One of my favorite romance tropes is a good slow burn. And so, like, I love the tension. I love the yearning, especially like when the guy falls first, right? But definitely not too slow where I feel like the FMC is really pulling back and I just get really frustrated. There have been times where like I've read it and I tell Stephanie and Ethan, I'm like, okay, I can't. She needs to just shut up and admit how she feels.
Yeah.
Come on, girl. You know you love him. And I always hate that whenever they're having their...
What was the last one you were reading and you told me you hated her?
Oh my God, it's so bad, y'all.
Was it Spark of the Everflame?
Spark of the Everflame. It was just so bad, so bad. And people love it. But a lot of people say they cannot stand the FMC, but like the MMC carries the story. I can't get past it. She is just too stubborn, y'all. And I cannot get past like all her, like, I hate him, I hate him, I hate him, I hate him. Like, okay, we know you love him because you talk about how much you love him in your head. So I can't, like, I can't do that. So anyway, sorry. I'm getting into things. I'm getting too focused on these FMCs. Steph, I know. I just get really frustrated when they just get so like bogged down and so stubborn. I'm like, girl, but you know you love him. You've talked about it for the last 10 chapters. You just won't admit it. So like, come on. Anyway, Steph, Ethan, what do you guys like about romances?
So at the beginning of the episode, I did call myself out for not being a romance fan typically. And it's because I just can't get over like the cheesy factor and it just doesn't seem relatable to me. Like, who's actually like that with their partner? Not me, at least. However, I do like romantasy. And I think the reason I like romantasy is because the fantasy factor is in there, so I can get past the cheese factor. And it's typically not as cheesy in a romantasy. So, you know, and for me, it's just fun to like picture falling in love with like a centuries old, like shadow daddy, bat boy. Obviously that's not relatable. So you obviously it's an escape for me. It's, you know, something outside of whatever it is I'm dealing with in the real world. And it's just fun, you know? Mm-hmm. To be honest, a lot of the broody guys in romantasy I would probably hate in real life because they always have like an arrogance and this attitude that I just can't stand in real people. So I probably would never fall for someone like that, but you know, it's just fun to turn off reality and like get lost and escape into something fun.
I think it's funny that like you focus on what you don't like about the males, or like the MMCs, and like I focus way too much on what I don't like about the FMC.
One thing about me is I will always support women's rights and especially women's wrongs.
I love that.
I'm not saying that I wouldn't.
It's going to be the title of the episode, you know.
But man, enough is enough when it comes to being too stubborn. Maybe I'm too stubborn and maybe I'm just kind of like...
You know what's hilarious is you are pretty stubborn, so...
Yeah, are we just having that realization?
That's probably why. It's a little bit of projection.
Oh, she's so stubborn. I hate her.
That is so funny, y'all.
She says stubbornly.
This is why we have these discussions, though, because you gotta...
It's to call us out, to keep us humble. Yeah,
exactly. To keep us, to call me out. Because honestly, please do.
Oh my gosh. Well,
I'm sorry, Ethan. What about you?
Yeah.
Moving on.
Sorry.
Before I was stubbornly interrupted. But like I said in the beginning, I do love a good romance because to me it is the epitome of escapism, you know, besides fantasy. So I love that escape. I like the way it makes me feel. Even the cringy lines, like I hate the cringy lines, but I also love the cringy lines at the same time. Like, Sweet Home Alabama with Reese Witherspoon. Like at the very end, she's like, so I can kiss you anytime I want. I'm like, oh, that is gross. But also it's so good because I want to talk about how gross it was, you know? So I'll almost like audibly roll my eyes when I read something like that, but then immediately I want to go talk about it with someone. What I like about romance, you know, outside of romantasy, is the fact that male characters don't always have to be angsty and broody. We get that more outside of fantasy than we do in fantasy. So that's always nice to see when I read something else. While I love a good grumpy sunshine, I just don't like it all the time. What I appreciate most about romance is that you know exactly what you're getting with it. Whereas a lot of people that keeps them away from romance. Like, I don't want another happily ever after. But for me, If
Right.
I'm reading a romance, it's because I know what I'm getting. Like, it's like watching a Hallmark Christmas movie. I know exactly what I'm getting with it, and yes, I want more. Like,
Yeah.
so if I'm reading a romance, it's for that purpose because I know
Right.
what the payoff is. It's like a prescription for anxiety almost, you know. If I'm feeling
Yeah.
a little anxious, I need to grab a romance. You know, I need to go back and reread Red, White, and Royal Blue. But yeah,
It's like comfort food.
yes, yeah. It's like I have Friends or Schitt's Creek or Drag Race playing in the background now. You know, it's what I need.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I like about romance.
Yeah. I will say that that's why I really like Anna Wong's stories. Like every one of her stories ends on a happily ever after. And what I like about that story is not the ending, it's how they got to the ending. What the characters had to go through together to get to their happily ever after. And so a lot of the time it's like the journey, it's the journey, not the destination, right? And so that's what I really like about her stories, and I really like about a lot of the romances that I do read. Because it's like, I want to see what the characters go through. I want to see all the hardships and obstacles and all of the really spicy tension-filled moments that they have for them to get to the happily ever after. So, I don't know.
All really good points, you guys.
Yeah.
I might just be a romance girly after this.
All right, everyone. Well, that marks the end of this episode. Next week, be sure to tune in for our next part of Beach Read by Emily Henry, where we will be discussing chapters 8 through 14. Be sure to interact with us on social media. We are Books Between Friends Pod on all of our platforms. Be on the lookout for our podcast clips. Join us for some discussion through the comments. We want to hear from you. Speaking of, we're going to ask for your review, right? If you're enjoying our bookish banter, please let us know. Let us hear about it on Apple. Please leave us a review. Help our podcast grow. It makes me feel like Rita from Power Rangers. Make my monster grow. Help our podcast grow. We would love to hear from our book friends. Speaking of book friends, we have a review to read. I love this name. This is from Adorkable Fran. That's
So cute.
that's very adorkable. And Adorkable says, I am obsessed with tuning into this podcast. As a bookish fanatic, I am always looking for new book recommendations and reviews. I have stumbled across the right podcast, and I am glad that I did. Well, we're glad you did. Thank you so much.
Yay. Thank you, Adorkable Fran. That's so awesome.
All right, guys. So for part 2, things are heating up in North Bear Shores. In next week's episode, we dive into January and Gus's Deal of the Summer, a genre swap writing challenge that has sparks flying and tensions rising. From awkward writing dates to emotional unburnings, these chapters serve banter, vulnerability, and just a hint of slow burn chemistry we've all been waiting for. Writing lessons, late night windows, and emotional walls start to crack. Are we watching two authors fall in love or fall apart? Tune in Monday as we discuss character growth, literary tension, and all the moments that made us swoon or scream.
That's a wrap for Books Between Friends today. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next chapter.